All right, everyone, this is Body Systems Part 4. Now, I apologize. Basically, my PowerPoint got cut off. It was a weird glitch there. Sorry about that. I was saying disorders of the kidneys, edema, retention of water and salt, things like that. Edema is just accumulation of fluid in body tissues. It can lead to heart failure. Heart failure happens because you get imbalances in ionic composition of your body fluids. Basically, your salt balance is real off, and that can lead to a loss of consciousness. Now, that was what I was saying at the end of the very last slide at the end of PowerPoint 3. Now, on this slide here, disorders of the kidneys, people who are in kidney failure can undergo a couple of different options. They can do dialysis, which is basically where they're hooked up to a machine and their blood is cleaned up. They have to go a couple of times a week, okay, and the blood is just passed through an artificial kidney machine. They can do CAPD, which is a good option, like if you live in a rural area or if you can't come into town and do dialysis a couple of times a week. Basically, it's kind of like a bag, and fresh dialysis is going to be introduced into the abdominal cavity from a bag that's temporarily attached to a permanently implanted plastic tube, and water and salt just pass from the blood vessels in the abdominal wall into the bag. So people can do that. Or you can also have a kidney transplant if you're fortunate enough to have a donor. Basically, a donor kidney just replaces the kidney that is not working right. Organ rejection is possible. The 1-year survival rate is very high, though, 95 to 98%. However, donor organs are always in short supply. Okay. Now, this is dialysis right here. Basically, the dirty blood is pumped out through a machine, and the dialysate is that's dirty is just collected. Okay, it's got urea and excess salt that needs to be filtered out, and then fresh dialysate is just pumped back in, and that goes back into the patient's bloodstream. Now, disorders of the bladder and the urethra, you can have bladder infections. Urine leaving the bladder should be bacteria free, but the urethra is normally colonized with bacteria, and bacteria can make their way up into the bladder. That happens particularly in females because females tend to have a much shorter urethra than males. You can also have bladder stones, which are a result of bladder infections or prostate enlargement, anything that interferes with urine flow. But basically, bladder stones can be kidney stones that may be going up to the bladder, or actually, they can be carried down the ureters into the bladder, and they can be removed surgically or broken apart. Okay, which by lithotripsy, which is just an ultrasound that waves that shatter the stone. Okay, and then bladder cancer. Smoking is a huge risk for bladder cancer. The most common type of cancer that affects the urinary system is bladder cancer. Okay, and some types are very malignant, and sometimes the bladder has got to be removed. Now, your skeletal system. Skeletal system has several functions, of course, for structure and support and protecting our organs and making blood cells in our red bone marrow. It stores minerals and fat, things like that. Now, here's your skeleton. Okay, and basically the blue part, that's your axial skeleton, which includes your skull, your ribs, your thoracic cage, your vertebrae, or your spine, and then the sacrum and the coccyx. And then you have your appendicular skeleton, which is your hips, your scapula, clavicle, and then your arms and your legs. Okay. Now, you don't have to remember shapes of bones or anything like that, but it's just two ways of kind of classifying the skeleton. And here is the inside of a long bone. Here you have your epiphyseal plates at the ends of either bone. Your diaphysis is just the shaft of the bone. And the bone has blood vessels in it and nerves, and that's one reason why it hurts so much if you break a bone. And when you have compact bone and spongy bone. Okay. Now, skeletal muscles tend to work in pairs. They're voluntary, so we do choose to move them. And they are covered by fascia, which is just connective tissue, and tendons will attach muscles to bones. Okay. And the origin of a muscle, that's just the end of the muscle that's attached to a stabilized bone. And the insertion part of the muscle is on the bone that is actually moving. Okay. Here are some skeletal muscles. We have all of them. We actually all have a six-pack. Okay. Some of us just don't show ours. And anyway, this is what we all look like when our skin is taken off. Okay, you don't have to know specific muscles or anything like that. Now, skeletal muscles, they're named based on, size or shape or where they are, or what they do. Okay. Mostly they have a lot of Latin names, but there are about 650 skeletal muscles. Now, there are different types of muscle fibers. Slow twitch fibers are here in brown, and they are aerobic fibers, and they're really important for long distance running, cycling, triathlons, things like that. People that do those Ironman competitions. Okay, slow twitch muscle fibers have a lot of steady power. Okay, a lot of endurance. Your fast twitch muscle fibers, those are your anaerobic fibers. Those are for people that do sprinting, CrossFit competitions where you have to climb the rope really fast, cage fighting. Okay, but they have real explosive power, very fast. They fatigue really easily. Okay, aerobic just means that oxygen is needed. So slow twitch, they have to have oxygen. Anaerobic, though, they don't have to have oxygen. These are anaerobic fibers in our fast twitch muscle fibers. Now, your nervous system, you have two main divisions. You have your central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord, and then your peripheral nervous system, which are the nerves all over the body. And nerve cells are also called neurons. Now, sensory neurons are just going to take messages to the central nervous system, and they detect changes in the environment. You have inner neurons that are in between sensory neurons and motor neurons. And then you have motor neurons that deal with helping us move. Okay, and they carry messages from the brain and the spinal cord to an effector. And an effector is a muscle, an organ, or a gland. But these are the three classes of neurons. And here's what a neuron looks like. Okay. You've got the cell body up top with the dendrites. That receives messages. The message travels down the axon and delivers that message to an effector, such as a muscle. Now, organization of your nervous system. You have your brain and your spinal cord, that's your central nervous system, and your peripheral nervous system is just everywhere else. You've got cranial nerves that go through your head, spinal nerves, somatic or nerves that go out to the body, like your skeletal muscles. You have your autonomic nervous system, which is responsible for fight or flight. Okay.